Richard, it's lovely to see you. And what's wonderful is that we're recording at time of having been in lockdown, and every person I speak to is tanned, and so are you.
Yeah, well, I haven't had much to do, actually. I've been out gardening most of the time. The conference circuit's been a bit quiet.
It has indeed. It has indeed. Although in the introduction, I did refer to the fact that you wrote about a certain situation we're going through now in 4 of your 5 books. So I'm going to pick your brain on that. But before I start on that, I'd love you to explain your risk radar and trends map. What is that, and when did you get the idea for that?
Oh, the trend maps go back to an awfully long time. They go back to about 2007, I think. And I was starting for, I don't remember why, but I was writing a Word document on global megatrends, and it was so boring, it was sending me to sleep, and you couldn't show connections or anything. And I got the kids' crayons out, they were quite small at the time, and started doing a mind map on the kitchen table in colored crayons, and had it sort of designed up properly, and people really liked it. And I've more or less been doing one ever since. One back in 2010, which looks a bit like the London Underground map, had some global game changers at the bottom, and one of them was a global pandemic. I did a major update. The last major update was in 2017. And one of the key points in the middle was anxiety. We then had localism fighting against globalization. And again, we had some global game changers at the bottom. And we've got global pandemic again, and we've got mental health pandemic, not a pandemic, a mental health, what do you call that?
Crisis.
A bigger word, but yeah, exactly
Yeah,
that.
okay.
And then the risk radar was in 2015, and that largely came out. I'm not breaking any confidences here, but I attended 2 cabinet office workshops on extreme risks, and there was a human-made extreme risk, so that's things like terrorism, and there was a natural extreme risks, things like pandemics. And interestingly, the pandemic was pretty much agreed by the workshop to be the highest probability, highest impact event that anyone could think of. Anyway, I having attended that, I did this sort of risk radar, which looks a bit like a sort of radar, plotting probability against impact. And this was cleared with the Cabinet Office because there were certain things we discussed which I definitely can't talk about. But the pandemic is, it was widely known. You're right. It's featured in one way or another in 4 out of 5 books. 3 of those 4 ways are pretty on the money. One, I underplayed it quite significantly. And then there have been countless workshops. I mean, I've got outputs from workshops going back the last 10 years where, yeah, I mean, we've got pandemic against all a bunch of other stuff that were happening. So, I mean, and I'm not alone in this. Loads and loads of people have been discussing pandemics for a very, very long time. And the cliche was, it's just a matter of when, not if. So the interesting thing really is, well, why didn't people pay more attention to it? And I think the reason for that is a sort of present bias. We are focused very much on now and the very near future. We base our decisions to some extent on very recent personal experience, personal data. And it's very difficult to deal with something that could be 10 years into the future. And we'd also had a couple of sort of red herrings, remember, with pandemics. We thought they were coming before a few times, and we sort of stocked up on various things that were never needed. So I think that probably affected the culture of various organizations as well. So yeah, I mean, it's been in the air, shall we say, for quite a long time.
And so do you think that's why people didn't plan then, that they really were thinking, as you said, about the now and the red herrings? Is that why we weren't ready?
I think, well, we'll find out, I guess, in due course, won't we? And there is the exercise, I can't remember exactly what it's called. It was the exercise Signet, where they modeled a pandemic.
Yeah.
And that currently, there's been a freedom of information request to see it, and it's being denied at the moment. But I think possibly it was just too horrific for people to really deal with. And, we weren't exactly floating with cash until quite recently. So, the thought of actually sort of stockpiling on things that may not be necessary, I guess, wasn't a particular priority. But I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm thinking very much about the government in this context, but, all other organizations have known about this, and there are plenty of other risks that are very, very likely and very impactful that we're probably equally giving a blind eye to. And it ranges everything from very high to very low oil prices to a bunch of other stuff.
Did you put a probability on the pandemic?
No, but as I say, the risk radar has 4 quadrants, and it's essentially a circle, and it has 2 axes, and one axis is probability from sort of practically 0 to 100, and the other is impact from 0 to 100. And it was out on the right hand side at, as I say, very, very likely and very, very impactful.
Okay, so if anybody wanted to get hold of your trends and map and your risk radar, can they? Is it accessible to anybody?
Yeah, they're on the internet. Just Google Richard Watson Risk Radar, Richard Watson Trends and Technologies, or you can go to nowandnext.com, and on the top of the toolbar it says Thinking Tools, and they're all on there.
Right. Well,
So
we'll add links. Yeah, fantastic. We'll add links, because I mean that's invaluable, and I think part of the problem, Richard, is perhaps maybe people didn't know that all of that information and all of that future scenario trending and thinking was there. So if they'd all read it and read all your books, maybe we would have all been there.
Again, you can have all this sort of knowledge and you still don't necessarily do anything about it. By the way, it was getting a bit depressing on the risk radar of all the sort of horrible things that could go wrong. And so I decided that there should be a joke on there. And I remember putting down Trump becoming president. And I, at the time, thought that was extremely unlikely. And also, if you put him on and he became president, that dates the risk map rather badly. So as a joke, I put Kim Kardashian running for president it's actually on the risk map. And then the great weirdness was that about a month later, her husband said he might actually run in the 2020 election. So it just shows what a strange and weird world we're living in at the moment. And it's very difficult to write, I think, sort of futurist fiction at the moment, because it's hard to imagine how it can get much weirder.
Or you have some secret power, Richard.
No, I mean, my hit rate's pretty good, but no, there's no secret power. There is a sort of instinctive side to it. I mean, there's art and science meeting, I guess.
Fantastic. So, okay, as we have you here, what's going to happen next?
Well, I think that's the wrong question. I think the question we should be asking ourselves is, well, what would we like to happen next?
Okay.
And that is being discussed. I think Demos have set up a sort of major, possibly the biggest piece of research in UK history, pretty much asking that question. I'm going to dodge the question as well, your question, because I think it's too early to say, and things are changing by the minute. I mean, I've pretty much given up reading newspapers in real time because it just gets me angry and upset and anxious, and I quite like reading them a couple of days late when things have generally moved on, and you know, new policies have been announced, or there's different data or something like that. So it's very, very difficult to say. I am very cynical about these people that say it's going to change everything. Well, I think that's just total nonsense. I'm very cynical about anyone that uses the word will or won't, actually, because that implies 100% certainty. I think could, maybe, should are better words to use. I mean, there are certain things that are looking highly probable. I mean, I think the way people work is going to change, but it's not as binary as people no longer go to the office. I mean, some people won't, but other people like going to the office. You know, there's the social side to offices and so on. I think there's going to be more flexibility in how people work. And I think the pandemic has accelerated, and a lot of people have said this, it's accelerated trends that were happening already. It's just made things that might have taken 5 years happen in 3 months. So more flexibility about how people work, and the end of this sort of slightly neo-feudal idea that you have to go to a physical building between 9 and 5 days a week to do your job. Well, you know, if you work in a factory, it's pretty helpful to actually go to the factory. But if you are a knowledge worker, I'm not entirely convinced it matters where you are, but you still need to go, because you're trying to create a common culture. You're trying to inspire people, and things like innovation are inherently social. And it's those serendipitous encounters where you bump into somebody from a different department boiling a kettle in the kitchen, which is pretty hard to replicate in a Zoom meeting. You also miss, by the way, all the sort of the body language and all those subtle communication sort of clues you get when you're physically present. So again, I'm not a believer in this sort of binary future where something we used to do vanishes totally. So that's a distinct possibility. I think we're probably going to become more local, but that again, that was happening already. We were beginning to deglobalize, in my view, already before this even happened. So I think localism and sustainability is going to come through. And it's been really interesting, and the experiment hasn't finished yet, but people had time for the first time. They were really thinking for the first time. There was some proper silence around. We started to actually notice nature. The birds have always been singing, but we've been too busy and it's been too noisy for us to really notice. So I think this might push the sustainability agenda quite significantly. I think the sort of the community aspects, which links into the localism thing, I think there might be some sort of residual there. I would like to think we're going to be kinder, but I'm not sure. I mean, my sort of cynical position, and I quite like taking the opposite view on everything anyway, but these people that say everything is going to change, I think it's going to go back to something adjacent to normal very quickly. I mean, I think we'll be on planes by the end of the year, if not sooner. I mean, I have every intention of getting on a plane in July and August if I can. What else would I say? Yeah, we have short memories. I mean, we've been through similar things before where, 7/7 and nobody gets on the underground for a week, and then all of a sudden they're piling back on again. And convenience rules as well. I mean, another thing, I think the shift to online is probably here to stay up to a point. But again, that doesn't mean the death of shops, because same reason as offices, people like the physical interaction with people and physical objects and all the rest of it. It's a much richer experience, not if you're buying cornflakes, but if you're buying clothing or some other things that are quite emotional. So yeah, I'm a little bit cynical about what's going to change, really, but I'm open to the fact that I could be completely wrong about that. But I'd be very surprised. I mean, the weird thing to say, I don't think this has been a big enough event. This has been 3 months and it's pretty much broken already. Not that many people in the grand scheme of things have died. I think this would have to go on for a significant amount of time. We'd have to have a second wave with another lockdown and significantly more people dying for this to make a really significant change to how people live their lives.
Which, of course, is still a possibility. Where at the
That
time
is
of recording,
a possibility. I mean, one question I've been asking myself is, what if there is no post-pandemic? What if this just carries on? What if we're relying on a vaccine? Well, what if there isn't one? Vaccines are hard to create. We've been trying to get hold of a vaccine or whatever for cure the common cold for a very long time. No luck there. So this may just go on, or we may just get persistent additional waves until it finally disappears. Although it's interesting to me that the government has scared people to death, literally, and now people won't go out. And in the grand scheme of things, again, this is not something I'd put on Twitter, but not that many people have died. I mean, I think a million people a year globally die from dirty water. We're talking globally at the moment about 350, 400,000 off the top of my head. It's not comparable to some of the other viruses that we've had. It's not comparable to the Spanish flu after the First World War. It is very risky if you're a certain type of person. If you're much older, if you're essentially unwell, it's extraordinarily risky. But for people under the age of sort of 30, 40 or something that are essentially healthy, it's not that bad.
Well, we won't argue about that, but I think if you've been personally affected by it, I think you do review it differently, and you do take it a little bit more seriously. I mean, I have. My family's from Lombardy. We lost a relative. He was one of the first victims.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
So we've been badly affected by it. So yeah. Yes, it has. So unfortunately, I'm probably more of the risk averse level to you, and I'm hoping and praying we won't have a second wave, but I think it is a possibility. And I'm also thinking it could become endemic, exactly as you say. It could be something that we're going to have to learn to live with. However, I love the fact that the two things that you said that totally resonate with me. We do have short memories, which means that in fact, I think that's why it's one of the reasons that women will have more than one babies. They forget the labor pains and they remember the good stuff. We'll forget, hopefully, the pain we've gone through, remember the good stuff that's come out of it, and therefore carry on. So I agree with you there. And convenience rules, my goodness. I mean, this is the theme for our generation, isn't it? Convenience. So totally agree with you there. I can see why people will go back to normal in that respect. I love the fact that you're saying sustainability is going to stay much higher on the agenda. I think that's so important. So important.
The other thing that came through for me was this: having less choice was better. So, there's that great book, The Paradox of Choice, by Barry Schwartz, I think, I can't remember. When we were down to that last jar of marmalade and there was no real prospect of getting another one, boy, did you savor that last bit on a bit of toast. There was something rather wonderful about that, and there's a sort of beauty and constraint as well. I mean, not being able to go anywhere there's something quite nice about that in a way. It was quite liberating. I mean, what was very liberating is not have to worry about what you're wearing. There was less pressure to be somewhere else. That was all really quite pleasant, actually, to some extent. Although, I'm speaking from a privileged position. I think if you're, there was somebody on the news, 14th floor of a tower block, no outside balcony, 3 kids, single mum. Oh my God, whole different ball game. But some people, I think, have found the experience to be quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it also gives you time to rethink. And as you say, time that we don't normally have. And actually it leads me on to your new book is You Are Not Busy. Now I'm going to have an argument with you here. I'm definitely busy. I might not be achieving anything, but I'm busy.
We've kind of shoved that on ice for the time being because, I mean, it's finished. And when I was writing it, I think most people would describe themselves as very busy. A large proportion of the British population recently have not been that busy, with some notable exceptions. I mean, I know medics that have never been busier. Lawyers seem to be consistently busy. Bankers are consistently busy. But yeah, it's not a great time to be releasing a book like that. Although, funnily enough, some of the themes were quite interesting because, I mean, to begin with, the book was looking at, or basically disproving, that most people are busy. I mean, there are undoubtedly people that are busy, but a large bunch of people are not as busy as they say they are, and you can prove that with the numbers. So you could then look at, well, why are you saying you're busy then? What's the reason for that? And then the second half of the book looks at the benefits of being less busy. The benefits of doing absolutely nothing for a day, or doing certain things at a slower pace, etc., etc. And we have been experiencing some of that. And I think, again, some people have found that quite useful. I mean, this whole questioning of how we live, I don't think would have happened if everyone had been universally busy. It's the fact that people have been able to sit outside, listening to the birds and the wind in the trees, with nothing to do for a couple of hours, has allowed people the time to think quite deeply about how they live. I genuinely don't think that would have happened otherwise.
Okay. And there's another book you've written, Digital versus Human. Is it a versus situation, or is it digital plus or human plus?
Well, you've ruined the ending there by saying that. No, the solution should be digital and human. We should work out what we're really good at, what AI and robotics and automation and screens are really good at, and sort of use the best tool for the job and let AI do the things it's really good at that we're not very good at. The danger is we basically replace people with machines for the wrong reasons. That's basically because it could save companies money. That's the sort of the concern I've been talking about. But the good news is that the things we find really easy, machines, AI finds very difficult, and to some extent vice versa. So again, I'm pretty optimistic about that. I mean, hopefully it's going to get rid of the really awful, mundane, rote, dreadful, boring jobs, which is no bad thing at all.
Yeah, and do you think now, because obviously you said earlier that things have accelerated, things that were happening have accelerated. Do you think this digital revolution has accelerated? Has it stopped? Are we? Or what's happening?
I mean, to some extent, big tech's got off the hook because of the pandemic, because there was quite a sort of backlash against big tech. I mean, for various reasons, for not paying tax, for the founders behaving like they were gods. I mean, a bunch of reasons. And they obviously become rather important recently. And it's interesting to speculate what would have happened over the last 3 months without the internet, which, if you live where I do, was practically what happened. Yeah, it's accelerated the digital trends that were already happening. Although I still think there is, what was I going to say? It's not quite anger, and it's more than animosity towards some of these big tech firms. I mean, for example, the way some of them, particularly Facebook, have been responding to what's been happening in the US recently hasn't gone down terribly well. So I think there's still an issue with them, but it's definitely brought things that were happening already forward very, very quickly in some instances.
Okay, so tell me about, with all your research, your insights, how do you help leaders with this information? Do you just give them the information, or do you give them some guidance and some support in sort of planning ahead?
Um, well, where would you start with that one? I mean, they've got to be in the mood to listen for a start. And I've had numerous instances where people have been really interested in trying to think further ahead and make their strategy and risk management more resilient and so on, but they just can't find the time to do it because whatever's happening next week or tomorrow is somehow more important. And you can give people some really good information, but they're just not ready to listen to it or react to it. And obviously, if you're talking about the future, particularly the distant future, there is no data. I mean, you can extrapolate existing trends forward, but fundamentally, there's no data. So there's a level of sort of trust to be had there. So you need an organization where senior people are inherently curious about things, that are trying to make things more sort of open and resilient and agile. And then if you've got their attention, you can just essentially get them to stop and think. And that's funny enough, the dirty little secret of a lot of futures thinking is it's not even about the future a lot of the time, it's about the present. But you're giving people the excuse to simply stop and think deeply for an extended period of time, which is to some extent back to this pandemic. I mean, if you are a sort of middle ranking or even a quite senior person in a large organization, you spend an entire day, let alone an entire week, staring out of your window in the office, you're probably going to get into trouble. But the fact of the matter is, you might be thinking. But if you say, "Oh, I'm thinking about scenarios for the future of the telecoms industry," then it's perfectly acceptable. So thinking about the future is a really good excuse to allow people to think deeply about the present and where they're going, what the sort of the destination they're trying to get to is, and how they're going to get there, and how they're going to bring people along on the journey, and so on and so forth. But there are plenty of people that are just not interested, that are just interested in right now in the short term. And clearly, I mean, radical thinking about the future is extremely uncomfortable, which is possibly back to your question about why was nothing done about this pandemic, which was widely seen. There is a present bias. You know, we discount things, spending time and money on things that have payoffs in the distant future. And people will just ignore that to some extent. So you've got a hard time getting people to listen. And whether this is going to make things easier or not, I suspect not. Again, there'll be a flurry of activity for the next year or two, and then we'll sort of go back to our old habits fairly quickly.
Okay, fascinating. I think you're so right about having time to think, and certainly we have had more time to think. So here we go, looking at scenarios. We're in the industry, you and I, of meetings and events, and we've been hit by this pandemic. What do you think the scenarios are for us for the future, for future meetings and conferences?
It's good to think in terms of scenarios rather than, well, this is going to happen. I haven't thought about various scenarios, but off the top of my head, again, similar answer in that we will get back to something approaching normal eventually, in sort of incremental baby steps. There's a lot of nervousness out there at the moment. So nobody is rushing to go to a large conference somewhere, particularly inside, which is where most of them are. But there is I think, a very strong human need to interact with other people. You know, this is, I mean, I've old enough to remember people saying that conferences were going to die because we just teleconference everything. We'd have virtual meetings. Why would you fly to Milan from other countries to have a meeting when you can just do a teleconference? And it's not happened. I mean, we use teleconferences where we can't do anything else, or for sort of things that are not that important. But if it's, you know, if you're buying and selling a company or doing something really important, I think you're going to want to meet physically. And the other thing is, it's not just about, I mean, I'm doing a conference on Monday virtually, much against my better judgment. I don't particularly want to do it, but I will. And it'll be okay, but it's a bit like online education. You're missing all the good bits. There's no banter. There's no drinks in the bar afterwards. And most of the really great conferences I've ever been to, the really great conversation happens at either end of the conference, particularly at the end of it in the evenings. And you take that away, and it becomes quite a sort of sterile experience. So I think we will start with very small. We're doing virtual at the moment. We'll start with very small conferences, distanced, probably people wearing masks and gloves. And we will find that actually this sort of works. So we'll, a bit like schools, we'll increase the number of participants. I mean, I wouldn't dare speculate as to how long this will take, but I would think if we don't get a second wave, which is a very big if, I think we'll be back to something approaching normal in a couple of years.
Okay, all right.
Maybe sooner.
Yeah. Okay, I've got my fingers crossed for sooner, but that's really interesting. Thank you. And
we can also have some tech. I mean, look at what airlines are doing. You know, we can measure people's temperatures before they come into a room. We can, you know, I think we'll probably have tests that are pretty instant. I mean, look at what Emirates is doing with testing. You know, if we can get testing down to 10 minutes, we could test people before they met, before they even got on planes to go to a conference. I mean, I'm not convinced about health passports, because you could be clear one minute and infected the next. But there are ways of using technology to actually facilitate physical meetings.
Okay, I want to leave on a positive note, and we've run out of time, so I'm going to go back to one of the things you said about drinks in the bar. You and I bonded many years ago on the subject of wine. Have you discovered any good wines while you've been in lockdown, or don't tell me you've given up?
No, I absolutely have not given up. I think, like most people, I'm drinking rather too much. I had an instance recently where I had some weird desire to drink Retsina and braved a large, rather sterile, ghastly Sainsbury's to go and find a bottle because I couldn't find any online. I've switched recently to Red Rhones. And what else am I drinking? South African Chardonnay, I guess I'm into, yeah.
Fantastic.
Although I have been having the odd virtual drink with people, and that seems to work quite well. Although I did attend a virtual wine tasting, which got completely out of control.
Oh, I might try one of those. That sounds really good, a virtual wine tasting. That sounds like you probably would get out of control. Richard, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. You've taken us on all sorts of scenarios, given us all sorts of ideas and thoughts. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Maria. So